Alright, music fans, welcome back. It is Dave. It is the Real Music Observer, observing real music in real time for real people, just like you right there, and yours truly right here. Okay, so I was talking about Terry Kath yesterday, and I posted a video about just how brilliant the guy was. Of course, Terry left planet Earth, I believe it was January 23rd, 1978. And what I'm about to say next, actually, I have to preface it with a couple of things. First of all, what I'm going to say has to do with theory, with an idea, speculation. I've done videos like this before. I've gotten attacked here and there because, these aren't etched in stone facts, but they are the musings of somebody who's curious. And a couple of folks have approached me anonymously and have given me some interesting information about what they believe happened to Terry Kath. Now, the official story, mostly official story, is that Terry took out a gun and played either a game of Russian roulette, which people don't like to use that terminology. That's been more or less erased over the years. That he still had a bullet chambered, and he didn't realize he had that bullet chambered. He was with one of his, more or less his roadie, one of his roadies, who was over his house. There was quite a bit of drug and alcohol use that surrounded this. If you read Danny Serafin's account of it, it sounds like Terry had been using drugs for a couple of days straight. Before I get into what these theories are, we have to look at the arc of Terry Kath and his career with Chicago and the things that were happening. Now, again, you've got this amazing guitar-driven, horn-driven, experimental band that had elements of jazz and psychedelic and rock and at times hard rock and at times more experimental orchestral rock, all mixed in. These first three albums, the ones, by the way, that were submitted to the Hall of Fame to help Chicago get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame smartly. I don't believe in everything that Peter Chivarelli has been doing lately, but I think that was a good move. This was something out of the ordinary, whether you like Jimmy Guercio or not. He, as David Foster said, basically pressed record and let these guys more or less go unchecked. In other words, play, and then we'll see what we get after you play. And most of what they did, they could replicate on live albums with just amazing precision, and then go off on these incredible jams that probably inspired many of today's jam bands. Fast forward to the mid-70s, where the record label at this point has gotten used to the hit machine. Chicago is now churning out top 40 hits left and right, and each album has one or two really big hits. By the time they get to Cetera's monster worldwide #1 ballad, If You Leave Me Now, things are getting a little strained within the Chicago camp. You've got over here Danny Serafin and Terry Kath, who want to hold on to the old Chicago, and maybe Robert Lamb too, to some degree. And you've got the other guys in the band, I think, who have kind of an understanding that this is going to be the band's future. The hit machine is going to have to continue. Even though when they started this, it was an FM radio band, it became an AM radio band, which is kind of tragic. I mean, they had to edit Make Me Smile in order to get a hit onto AM radio, and that's how they got there to start. And then things started to progress. Rumor has it that Terry Kath, for quite a few years, had some serious issues with the direction the band was taking. Now, Terry was also working on a solo album at the time of his death, and that's another interesting tidbit here. And it was rumored through these sources that Terry was really plotting on just leaving Chicago. I know he had an interesting conversation that Robert Lamb likes to reference about how, he didn't want to play all the hits all the time, and Robert basically called him up and said, hey, we're going to play all the hits, just to see the kind of reaction he'd get out of Terry. I think Terry was a tortured soul, and here's why. At the beginning of his career, when Jimi Hendrix says, hey, you're better than me, or basically says your guitar player is better than me, and he says this to other band members, and then the incident where Terry goes to England, and all of the British press back in it's like 1970 or 71 or something, and they're all just fawning over Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck and all of these Brit guitar players. And he has a huge meltdown. I mean, such a meltdown Terry has that the band can't go back to England for quite some time. And they end up finally going back to England, I think, in 1989 or something like that. It took that long for those wounds to heal. But I think Terry was really ticked off that everybody is just admiring these guys and he's getting nothing. And I think that started to take its toll on him. He's thinking to himself, okay, I've got all this talent and now it's being wasted. We're playing ballads. Our music has now become very simplistic. Although more popular, it's not the kind of music that Terry Kath wanted to play. Terry had a very soulful voice. Some people have compared it to Ray Charles. So you've got all of these different attributes that you're bringing to the table. But for the most part, you're being ignored. You're being told that, hey, go in the corner and just play what we need you to play. I mean, he didn't even perform on If You Leave Me Now. That was not Terry Kath playing on that record. He went out and rode his motorcycle during the sessions, from what I understand. So Terry, of course, got into guns. He got into all this sort of dangerous living kind of stuff. And honestly, once you go through all this and look at it, and by the way, the sources I have truly believe that the way this gun was fired was done purposefully. Okay, this is where I'm getting into conjecture and theory. Okay, they believe the way the bullet traveled and how efficient it was, that it was done by somebody who knew exactly what they were doing. Somebody who's playing Russian roulette might graze themselves with a bullet. They may not hit the exact right area for a kill. I mean, you would think a headshot is a guaranteed kill, but that congresswoman, I think her name was Gabby Giffords, she was hit and she survived, and she's still alive. So it depends on where you hit. So all of this to basically say, maybe this wasn't an accident. Just maybe it wasn't an accident. Now, I know this may really offend the actual band members of Chicago who truly want to believe that this was just an accident, but maybe this guy was such a tortured soul. I mean, line after line in these books and in these documentaries, you hear, oh, Terry was using drugs. We told Terry to knock it off. Terry was, all right, if you go into this deep depression and you're self-medicating to further that depression, why is it a strange connection to say, well, maybe this was the culmination of all of that? Okay? This could have been Terry's way out. Now, the other theory is it could have been somebody else who pulled the trigger. There's no evidence of that, and I don't have any sourcing on that, but it's certainly a possibility based on how accurate the shot was. Typically, if you're doing this, if this was so haphazard, you're probably going to miss. And the fact that he didn't miss, or the gun went off exactly the way it was supposed to go off in order for him to not survive, that tells me a lot about this theory. Now, what's my own personal opinion on this? I don't know. I don't know, because I'm going against years of narrative. And honestly, I've read so many accounts of this. When they were talking early on, they were saying Russian roulette all the time. But that sounded too crazy, so then they said accidentally went off. I've heard he was cleaning it and it accidentally went off. I've heard all kinds of different things. The only guy who truly knows is the guy who was with him. And his account is, there was a bullet chambered and it went off, and we told him, everybody told him, stop, don't do this. He sat there and supposedly he was in a haze, and because of the drugs, because of this, because of that, he didn't have really any sort of sense of who he was at that moment, and said, just screw it, and then boom. But the accuracy of the shot is what I think is a bit interesting. I mean, wouldn't you be a little bit fearful, even if you knew that the gun was empty? Think of that. If I had a gun, somebody said it's completely empty, and somebody dared me and said, hey, why don't you just point it to your head and pull the trigger? I'd be like, no, I don't think I want to do that, just for the off chance it's loaded. Now, the drugs and everything else could have been a factor, but you have to take this all into consideration when you think this through. Now, for more discussion on this, there's a Facebook group out there. It's called Searching for Terry Kath. And it's probably worth your time if you're really into this story and you want to know more and talk to people who've done a ton of research on this topic. I don't think you'll be disappointed. You'll probably learn some things about Terry Kath, who in my estimation is the greatest guitar player that many people have never heard of before. And that's a tragedy in and of itself. All right, I'm Dave. I'm the Real Music Observer, and I'll be back with more stuff coming your way soon. See you then.